Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to get to be with you and share with you what has been life changing for me. Started at an early stage in life where I was just done with my idea of life being a joke. I mean, I'd arrived at that point where I really felt like it's repetition. Other people have done this before. I'm going to walk through a lifespan of repeat, repeat, repeat. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to get a vocation and occupationally supply enough to care for me and a wife and children and have a house with garage and drive my car in and out, and the years are going to go by. They'll turn into decades. I'll eventually get a watch or a certificate at the end of this saying you did well, and then I'll retire and wait for it all to end. What's life about? What really matters? And I think that was what led me to the curiosity of probably kind of with my hands in God's chest first, like, this is cruel, this is unfair, there's got to be more to it than this. And then it was him focusing my attention on Jesus, who was asked a question one day by an expert in the law. You find it in Matthew 22. Where in Matthew 22, Jesus was really ready for this. He knew it was coming because everybody was trying to trip him up, trick him, see if they could trap him. And so an expert in the law came to Jesus with a question. He knew that others had tried it. So hearing it says in verse 34 that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. The Pharisees got together, and one of them, an expert in the law, asked Jesus this question, testing him. So, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? I think without batting an eye, Jesus just lovingly looked back and responded. Love the Lord your God with all, the actual translation would be with all of your everything. But we will translate this with love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. In other words, with all of your everything, love God. And then he said, and love your neighbor, that person nearest you who's at arm's length in your life in any given moment. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he said, everything can be summed up in these. That's kind of the Reader's Digest condensed version is, you do these two things. Love God with all your everything. And that person near you, the way you love and take care of yourself, and everything else will fall into place. But he started with the first and most important thing. I don't know whether you know, but in North America and in other parts of the world, that there are more unpaved roads than there are paved ones. In rural places, almost every road is a dirt road, and in the springtime, when the rains are coming, the wheels of vehicles coming up and down that road will create grooves or ruts in the road. Sometimes they get pretty deep. There's one road in the state of Iowa in North America that says, choose your rut carefully. You'll be in it the next 20 miles. I think that that is the case for a lot of people. They get stuck in a rut. Somebody once said a grave is a rut with the ends knocked out of it. And sometimes people get stuck and need to get unstuck. Let me help you with a little story. I heard of a business traveler. He was a young newlywed, and he was sitting in an airport waiting for a delayed flight to take off. And so he just started watching other travelers. And as he watched, he saw a young father, it appeared, because he'd seen a woman with her 3 kids waiting. And sure enough, he heard the little guy about 6 years old going, there he is, there's Dad. And so he took off, jetting toward his father, and just tackled him, big old bear hug around the legs. And his dad looked down at him and said, Josh, I've really missed you. And reached down and gave him a big father hug. And then there was a young lad about 10, 11 years old who was standing there, and his dad stood up and reached out his hand to shake. Man, son, you're becoming such a young man. And with that, the son kind of dropped the hand and hugged his dad and said, Dad, I've really missed you. But at this point, there was a little tiny girl, about 2 years old, just wriggling out of her mother's arms almost, just reaching to get to her dad. And when he grabbed his little baby girl and pulled her in and just kind of rocked her side to side, smothering her with kisses, and she was just all gleeful and giggly. And then finally she just rested her head in his shoulder. And he held her for a little while and just said, "Your daddy loves you." This young business traveler, watching this family love exchange, thought perhaps that was it. But as he placed the little girl in the arms of the 10 or 11-year-old son and said, "Son, I know you got this," he turned to his wife and said, "Honey, I've saved the best for last." And with that, he pulled his wife in and he began to give her this young business traveler said, the most passionate public kiss he had seen perhaps in a very long time, if ever. And he said he actually got so embarrassed watching, he looked down like, "I don't know if I should be watching this." And he said he looked up when he thought it should be over by now, and it was still going on. He caught himself and went, and as he looked back and the kiss was coming to an end, he couldn't hold back. Without being able to help himself, he just said, "I'm sorry, wow. How long have you guys been married?" And the young couple who had these 3 children looked at him and said, "Well, we've been together 14, 15 years. We've been married 12. And the young guy said, "Well, I just recently got married, but I hope I'm that much in love that many years later." And then he thought about it for a minute and he said, "So how long have you been gone?" And the guy looked at him and said, "I've been gone 2 whole, not months, weeks, or years. It was 2 whole days." And the young businessman said, "Whoa. I really hope I'm that in love after 12 to 15 years." And all of life's a classroom. Somebody's always teaching, somebody's always learning. And this older guy got it. And he looked back at the young newlywed and said, "Son, don't hope. Decide. Choose." Life isn't made of the dreams we have. It's made of the choices we make. The switch tracks of life are choices. And what Jesus was saying in this passage was, choose to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's probably why a young Southern gal walked up to me, a high schooler who'd heard me speak about this passage, and she said, "Mr. Dwight." And I said, "What?" She said, "Mr. Dwight, I have something for you." And she reached out a bumper sticker that she had found, and she said, "I think you're going to love it." And I looked at this bumper sticker that said, "Remember, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing." It sounded a bit redundant to me, but I reread it, and she said, "Don't you just love it?" And I said, "Well, I do." She said, "Isn't that what you were saying?" I said, yeah. Yeah, it's not what I was saying. That's really, actually, you're right. That's what Jesus was saying. Remember, keep the main thing in your life. Loving God with everything in you. So if you're referring to the outline that is available to you, you're filling in, hopefully, that first blank, choose God as your first love. And my wife and I were first married. We were married later in our 20s. My wife was 27, I was turning 30, and we were so excited to be married. We were just caught up in honeymoon, romantic love, and we had both developed a deep, intimate relationship with God. But within the first year of our marriage, at about 5, 6, 7 months, we were on a trip, and as we were coming back from that trip, I heard my wife sniffling on the passenger side of the car. And I said, "Honey, did you catch a cold?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Whoa, are you okay?" I glanced over as a driver, and she was wiping tears. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "No, I've been thinking about it." We were listening to some worship music in the car, and just, I think both of us kind of in the quiet of the car contemplating intimacy with God. And she said, "I'm sitting here missing God. I used to share my single gal condo with him. I shared life with him, and now it seems like it's full of a lot with you, and I'm missing God." I sat there driving down the road thinking, I'm not so sure I'm not missing him too, at a level that is wrong. I'm never supposed to allow another primary love to take his place. And without realizing it, that had happened. I'd kind of gotten in this new rut of life that both she and I wanted to get out of. And before the end of this 5-hour drive, we'd made some really crucial decisions. And the choice was, as she turned to me and said, "Honey, you will always be my number one, second love." And I repeated to her, "Honey, it's a vow. You will always be my number one, second love." Because when God is who you choose to be your number one, first, forever, main thing love, it changes the polarity of your life from either other centrality or self-centrality to Christ centrality, and it gives you so much more capacity of what you have to offer and give to others. Because that's a relationship that's never going to leave you high and dry. It's never going to desert you or abandon you, and it's never going to leave you wanting for what is an unending supply in Him. In fact, if you go to your outline, why would you choose God as your first love? Your outline tells you because God will outgive, outlove, outbless, and outlast anyone else. No one can make that promise to you but Him. God will outgive, outlove, outbless, and outlast anyone else. Why would you choose anyone else as your first love? The main love of your life. The Westminster Catechism, when they sat together trying to figure out how to sum up what was most important for the Christian life, they said the chief end of man is to glorify God and to, hang on here, here's the word that we skip over, but they brought together in a capsulized version. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Enjoy Him. Some people have thought God is an idea to be explored. Or they'll approach the scriptures like God is a grouping of ideas and to be studied. Not true. God is a relationship to be engaged, experienced, and enjoyed. He doesn't want you to think about Him. He wants you to do life with Him. He doesn't want to be a studied idea like theology. You're going to study who He is. He wants to be not known about. He wants to be known. He's a revealer. He loves, Psalm 25 tells us, he loves to confide in those who fear Him and make His ways known. He loves you. And He wants a love relationship with you that you enjoy. I was talking with somebody earlier today and was talking about when our children were small, and I had one of our children who would always kind of be pulling outward. It seemed like you'd try to hold them and they were always kind of reaching for things and yanking outward. But every now and then they'd get weary, I guess, of outward thrust, and for a moment in their tired exhaustion they'd lean in a little bit. And I can remember being able to hold them more tightly, pull them in, and they'd settle in here, and I'd be able to even put my hand on their head. And there was something of me being transferred to them, and that's God's desire for us. That we wouldn't pull out and away, turn toward other things, but lean in and allow ourselves to be loved on by Him. If you look at your outline, you'll know that to love the Lord your God is the heartbeat of our life mission. It's the stream from which our service overflows. Some people have heard me talk about your God's plan A, and there's no plan B. For the people you're among, He's got a plan for you. There are plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. There's a life to be lived that's as unique and distinct in daily, along the way, 24/7 ministry as you are distinct and unique. And some people might mistakenly assume that their life is to be about doing things, but Jesus said, "Abide in me, and you'll bear much fruit." In other words, the secret to the plan A life you were designed by God to live is going to be born out of your intimacy with Him, out of this secure, life-giving, overflowing place of intimacy that you have with God. Then there's a natural stream that overflows. So when you're filling in to love the Lord our God is the heartbeat of our mission, the stream from which our service or our life of ministry overflows. abiding in him, it says you will bear much fruit. John 15, showing yourself to be his disciple. You're up close with him and it just naturally overflows. There's a contagious life that we're meant to live that brings him to the everyday scenes of life. So you're great. You're great. Come on. I know you're great. Do you know you're great? I mean, you were made in his image. You've been created by a master designer who is creatively wonderful in what he does, Psalm 139. But as great as you are, the world doesn't need you and me as much as they need him. But the more we've been with him, the more he shows up where we show up. And that's his plan. Love motivates action. Your love for him, Paul used to talk about, the Apostle Paul, the love of Christ compels me to do what I do. So your love will motivate action. John 3:16, we know that to be true of God, in whose nature we were created. And it says God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Love motivated action. If you go to Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, favorite, it's life verse for me. It says, be imitators of God as dearly loved children and live a life of love. Just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. I'll ask people sometimes, so who was Christ loving on the cross? Was he loving God or was he loving us? And sometimes vehemently people say he was loving us. But if you re-examine Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, that tells you to be an imitator of God's dearly loved children and live a life of love just as Christ loved us. And listen, gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Who was he loving on the cross? Both. He was doing what he told us to do. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Not my will, yours. And loving us, and love that one you're near as you love yourself. Not my will, but thy will be done, was what he had prayed in a garden and carried out all the way to the cross, loving God the Father and loving us simultaneously. So Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, John chapter 14, 15, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. It'll become a natural outflow in your life. Less prescribed and regimented. It's not as religious. It's actually a natural overflow. Ephesians 5:10 then. When you love somebody, you want to please them. You know, my wife, she loves her back scratched. I mean, when we first got married, I remember the first time she asked me to scratch her back, and I thought, wait a minute, that isn't the first time. She asked me to do that yesterday. I wonder if this is going to become a routine. I wonder if this is going to become a habit. I wonder if I'm going to have to do this every day. You know, there was this selfish resistance at first, like, oh my word, am I going to be scratching her back every day of my life? And then I went, I love her. Why wouldn't I? I started taking note at family gatherings that they would form lines of back scratching and care for each other in that way. And I realized, okay, I'm married into this family. I'm now in this lineup. Here I go. Now it's become such a natural overflow that without asking, she'll just kind of be standing there and kind of hunch her shoulders, and I'll be talking to somebody and I'll just be scratching. What is that about? Ephesians 5:10 says, find out what pleases the Lord. I know that pleases her. I know that's love language for her. You begin to discover this one that you love. You begin to discover what he loves and what pleases him, and you live that life because it's the overflow of a heart of love that takes you there. Ephesians 5:10 comes after Ephesians 5:1 and 2, which tells us to live a life of love, and by the time you get to verse 10, find out what pleases the Lord. So you and I desire not to know about him, but to know what pleases him. And we love doing those things because it becomes a love offering gift to him. There will be things that you'll do that others will think you did for them. But in your heart, you know you did that for him and them. So Ephesians 5, verse 10, find out what pleases the Lord. And then 2 Corinthians 5 tells us that Christ died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them. So I get the opportunity to live a life of love out of gratitude to the one who made this life that he said is abundant, full of meaning and purpose possible for me. how do I grow this love relationship with him? Well, as we close out this first section of choosing God as your first love, I think one of the things that became apparent to me one day reading Luke 5:16, that says Jesus often slipped away to solitary places to get alone with the one he loved most. I understood that from my horizontal relationships, that dates with people, whether they were lunch dates with friends or opportunities to do retreats or camping trips with people I loved, I put them on the schedule, or then when my romantic life began to engage and realizing that a date, I got a date, I recognized this was sort of like Jesus establishing dates with God. He'd often slip away to be alone with God. And you'll find other passages that give us that indication that Jesus would push back from everybody else to be alone with the one he loved. And then out of those dates, I started noticing that there'd be kingdom explosions of God's purposes and plans and power released on the earth that would happen after he'd been off on a mountain with God or alone. In fact, most people don't believe there would have been a Calvary if there hadn't first been a date with God in Gethsemane, a favorite place he liked to go. So let me give you a couple tips here about how to have a date with God, because it's fueled a relationship with God going to deeper places, so impact, influence in life could go wider out of that love relationship. So the first thing you want to do is schedule it. You know how that is when you talk to friends and you go, we got to get together sometime. Oh, yeah, let's get together sometime. And then you just don't, because you don't pull out your calendar and schedule it. That's when it happens. So don't want this idea, but actually you may want to just right now pull out a calendar electronically, pull out however you keep calendar, and look for a spot, a Saturday afternoon or a Monday evening or a morning on a day off where you're going to have date time with God. Some people try to block a whole day. You might just want to block 2 to 4 hours. A date with God. Maybe all you can afford right now in your life is a 1-hour date, but man, go for it. Schedule a date with God. Put it down that way, date with God, and make it such a priority you're not willing to move it off your calendar unless you're repositioning it, not too far out, but somewhere else, because you're committed. That date is going to happen. I need that. I want that. And then after you've scheduled it, find an optimal location, a place that you know you won't be reminded of work you need to do, a lawn that needs mowed, dishes that need done, schoolwork that needs done, whatever is on your to-do list. Push back to a neutral zone that doesn't remind you of all the stuff you got to do. So, in other words, don't do this in your own place. Find a place that is your kind of Garden of Gethsemane, where you feel released to just enjoy where you're at. You know, one woman calls her Garden of Gethsemane a little corner in a coffee shop that she really thinks is her corner. I mean, she's had so many intimate dates with God there. Got another friend who likes to go to a mountain stream, a little location where he's found there. I have a favorite spot at a state park not far from our home where I take my $10 over my shoulder Eddie Bauer chair I got years ago that pops out. It's even got a footrest on it. And I put my feet up and just enjoy being there, looking out. I live in Colorado, looking out over the lake at this state park and the mountains in the distance, and that's where I get to enjoy God. I've got different locations. Find a location that works for you. If it's during inclement weather, you know, you can borrow somebody else's place because you won't feel compelled to do their work for them. There are ministry buildings, church buildings that don't get used during the week. Maybe you want to just schedule to have a Sunday school classroom or a meeting room that is going to be yours. I've used public library meeting rooms. You can schedule those, and then I'd make sure I brought a little tape and paper, and I'd put a little sign on the glass on the door that private meeting in process, do not disturb, because I didn't want anybody walking in on my date, and just be able to lock myself in with God. Sometimes it's been to throw a blanket in the car and just go find a wooded area that I've never been to before. So you get the idea. Find a place that's optimal for you. And then, I'm going to offer one more thing I almost forgot about, and that's I've had a few occasions where I needed time with God so much, sort of like a few times when I've needed time so much with my wife, we just booked a hotel room to just be away for 24 hours away from life. And I've done that with God too, where life was so full, so heavy, that what I really needed to do was just find a spot that I could have a big chunk of time. You may want to consider doing something like that as well. Here's the supplies you need. Here's your supply list. Number one is you want your Bible. Because this is your love letter from Him. He's got all kinds of things that He There have been times where I'll actually almost check the ink to see if it's still wet because it feels like he put that there last night for me because it's that relevant. Take your Bible with you and know that you're not going to study the whole thing, but you actually have a date, a longer period of time. You can read the whole book of James, all 5 chapters. You could read it more than once. You could go back and look for a 5-star verse, like, 5-star hotels are the best. I asked my new son-in-law and his wife, my daughter, what one of the places was like that they stayed on their honeymoon, like on was it a 5-star? And they said, no, it was an 11. You might have an 11-star verse here where you go, whoa, that is so good. And you underline that and you're putting stars out beside it because you went back through James and you went, that verse is so for me. Like, I think he thought about me when he inspired that verse to be written. So you're looking for high-star verses that are for you. You might want to memorize. You've got time. You're on a date. You're not clock watching. You could memorize that verse, sort of like a song on a date or with a friend or a loved one. When you now hear that song on the radio, you always think about that time with that loved one. And so memorizing a verse might take you back to a particular date and spot that you had with God where that verse kind of just lifted out for you. So you can memorize a verse and take it from your date with you as kind of, that's not our song, that's our verse, man. That takes me there with you, God. You were speaking to me. That was an intimate moment. So take your Bible with you. You might want to do a topical study. Maybe not read through 5 chapters of James. Maybe you want to look up the word love or give or mercy or kindness and just do a word study following the concordance and go down through and see. That's the second thing you want to take is a notebook with you. Some people like to use the Forge app. They've got it on their iPad or their phone, and that might be where you're kind of taking notes of what God's teaching you and showing you because, man, this is revelation. Like you've never heard or sensed or experienced some of this stuff that's coming to you that you've really needed and you want to be able to record and go back to or share with somebody. I mean, that's the cool thing about the Forge app. You can click and share it with somebody. This was something I experienced or saw or was revealed to me on my date with God. Others of you really enjoy just that organic feeling of a pen in your hand with a real notebook, and you're going to write things down. But, I'm just going to ask you, come on, let's be real. Raise your hand if you actually think you do better not speaking your thoughts, but writing your thoughts out, whether it's this way, or this way, that you do better communicating through writing it out or typing it out. There's a lot of people who are that way. And so this is your chance to really express, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, to get it all out there to Him. So have a notebook with you or have a means that works for you. And I've talked with many people who say, when I'm communicating this way, it's something different out of me than when I'm communicating this way. Maybe you want to try both. But on a date with God, have a notebook, electronic or organic, where you're going to express yourself to God. Or, come on, He's going to say some things to you if you sit and listen to Him. There will be things He'll reveal that perhaps He's never whispered to you before. He's never whispered that to you before, and you're going, oh, wow. And you're writing that down. So some of it isn't just your thoughts to Him. It may be thoughts He's communicating with you that are valuable and treasurable. You're going to put a date out beside when you felt God whisper something to you. It might be an action step or some obedience step. It might be something He's inviting you to consider or do or give. It actually might just be an insight into your heart or your life or a relationship in your life. Third thing that you want to take along on your date with God is worship music. You might borrow some music from somebody. Maybe you tune in to Spotify or to Pandora or something electronically that's supporting. But sometimes ask a friend, has there been some worship music you've listened to lately? I had a friend just at breakfast the other day say, hey, have you ever heard? And he took my phone and found it on Spotify. He said, listen to this. This guy really, he said, this helps me on my dates with God. And I thought, I'm going to use this on my next date. Some people take a hymn book into their date, not because they know the tunes, but because the lyrics are so powerful. And they'll read 2 or 3 hymns that are about Him, that just help us in our love language communication. Sometimes read the book of Psalms. That's music. That's worship music. They used to sing this stuff out. We don't know what it sounded like those thousands of years ago, but we do know it was their way to ascribe to the Lord the glory that was due His name. So maybe you just want to read a psalm, or let me give you another tip. You could sing a new song to God. Doesn't have to rhyme, doesn't have to be beautiful. There's nobody but him listening, and I'm telling you, I'm a parent. As a father, when the kindergarten teacher tried to tell me my son couldn't sing, I went, who do you think you are? My son sings. Because to me, it wasn't about the beauty of, that's why it says make a joyful noise to the Lord. Come on, sing, hey God, you're beautiful, you're awesome. I like these mountains in front of me, or wow, look at this cool stick. It was a part of a tree and I'm supposed to be a branch, and if I'm connected to you, I can still bear fruit because wow, God, thank you. I love you. Thanks for being connected with me today. Now, you're going, Dwight, that didn't really sound much like a song. I'm telling you, come on. The enemy of God's, and if you're a love relationship with God, is pride. Drop it. Bash it. Get rid of your pride. Maybe the best thing you could do is sing a new song to the Lord and get over yourself. One of the guys who got over himself, and his wife tried to remind him, hey, you're a dignified king and you were undignified. You looked ridiculous out there, dancing before the Lord. Maybe you ought to dance when you sing before the Lord. And David, the psalmist, said, I'll become even more undignified than this. I will bless the Lord. His praise will continually be in my mouth, were words that David had written, and it was a life that he lived. Fourth thing to take along is a spiritual growth book or a devotional little book that you'll take with you. And that's just to kind of maybe help your mind or your heart fasten around some new, fresh ideas about your growth relationship with God. Don't get stuck there, because there's no book better than this. But I've got one I've kind of set aside that a friend recently gave me that's on soul care, and I'm looking so forward to visiting some of that content with God. Not about God, but with him. Asking him, is there some of this that you're wanting to share with me could enhance our relationship together? What kind of books? Well, just anything that others are telling you or you happen to have heard or know, that those are things that strengthen and deepen a relationship with God. Maybe Tozer, maybe it's Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest. It might be an old classic called Practicing God's Presence, or The Practice of the Presence of God, but something that helps you just deepen your relationship with God. And finally, you're going to want to take your prayer list, or maybe you need to develop a prayer list. But on your date with God, you got time to talk with him about extended family members that you love, and on your date, you and God could just have a discussion about these family members, that he might inspire you to pray certain things for them or for your friends, or maybe you're coaching an athletic team and you could pray down through the roster of that team, or you're a school teacher and you could pray for the students in your class. And for some of them, you might be the first prayer, audible prayer ever offered for that life. Maybe pray for the people who live around you in your neighborhood or your apartment or condo complex. This is your opportunity, maybe prayer walk with God. Go on a little walk with God and pray. And pray for those that he's inspired and put on your heart. A prayer list, maybe even take note cards. Paul would sometimes write out of his thoughts about God, his times with God. He'd write notes to people in what we call epistles. And it might not be an epistle, maybe it's a note of 4 or 5 sentences. Hey, I was on a date with God and I thought about you today and prayed for you. There was a verse that was like a 5-10-star verse for me, and I wanted to share it with you. It's this one. And write the verse and sign your name, and know that after this date's over, you're gonna add and share the blessing with somebody else. 2 final tips. One is, when you go on a date with God, enjoy the possibility of taking off your watch. Because you don't have to clock watch. This isn't your morning devotional time where you're driven by time because you got to get to work or school on time. But this was a date that you put on the calendar where you get to get rid of this thing and go, God, I've so needed time with you that hasn't felt constricted by time. And I go through a little ordeal. Like if I've driven to my date, I take my watch off in the car, talk with God and say, man, I've needed this date so bad. I can't wait to get rid of this, God. I've looked forward to not checking my watch when I'm trying to have time with you in the morning. Man, God, I need this day with you. And this is going under the seat of the car, and it's not going to be re-engaged until you and I have finished our date, whenever that is. So get rid of time. Don't let that get in the way. If you were on a date with somebody that you were in a love relationship with and you kept checking the time, wouldn't that be a bummer? So make sure you block enough time on your date to just be able to enjoy God and enjoy a release from time. And then the other thing I'm going to recommend to you, now I know I'm going to sound very unholy at this moment because, I could tell you, and I do fast sometimes, and fasting is a pattern and a discipline in my life. But on a date with God, where I want to remember the Westminster Catechism is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, I'm going to be honest with you. A cup of coffee in my hand or my favorite snack food, that's when I'm really having a good time. So I go by a convenience store and I'll pick up my favorite snack food that maybe I don't let myself have. And I'll go through the kitchen and I'll pull grapes, crackers, cheese, all sorts of, I have a bag that's got more food in it than you could eat in a day. But the whole idea is when I'm reading the book of James, I'm like, oh man, God, that is so good. And I'm having some crackers with cheese. And I'm having like a little God party here, like, woo, yeah, oh man, oh God, that's so good. And I'm just chowing down and feasting on what He's giving me that's living food, the bread of life. And then sometimes I'll even take elements for communion with me, and I'll have a communion time remembering Jesus' sacrifice of love for me. It's an incredible gift, for me at least, because food is synonymous with a good time, to know I'm going to have a good time with the one I love, who's my number one, first love. And I'd encourage you to take food on your date with God. So choose God as your first love. The second area of a relationship with God that is keeping the main thing, is to communicate. Choose to communicate your love. That is the one thing that marriage counselors will convey to a young couple, saying that your love relationship growing has a whole lot to do with the communication of your love. The 5 languages of love. Many people know that there are, and I'm kind of a believer that there's 6 languages, and I'll tell you what I think here in a moment, but that there are 5 ways that we tend to communicate love. The first one is through spoken words, and in fact, let's just go down through these one at a time. When is the last time you said audibly, God, I love you, I love you? I've talked with people through the years that said, we didn't grow up in a family that said, I love you. So it's like, it's foreign to me. It's not comfortable. But maybe that's why you ought to enter into spoken words with God. Not just thought words and written words, but spoken words of love. Maybe move beyond the statement, I love you, to, I love this about you, God. I love this. I've even encouraged people sometimes to use the alphabet. Lord, you are A, awesome, almighty, astonishing. Lord, you are B, beautiful, bountiful. One person said bodacious. Lord, you are C, creative, caring. One person said kind. And I said, well, that's down the alphabet a little bit. Lord, you are D, dynamic, delightful, deliverer. Lord, you are E, excellent. And you get the idea. Maybe you want spoken words to move to new language places. Could and should. And then I would encourage you as well, then the second language of love is written words. And if you're one of those persons who has done a great job at communicating through maybe written expressions that are handwritten, or maybe you need to try a text to God. I've had people say, I'm kind of in a different mode when I'm texting. Well, or email, or a Facebook message. No, I don't know God's address. That's not the point. You can send it to yourself. The point is that for some of us, we communicate in a different way. And this is trying to grow the love relationship you have with God. And people who are priority persons in your life, those are all the things you're doing with them. You're writing little notes on birthday cards, they're how much you love them, or you're texting them all the time, or Facebook messaging them, or emailing them. And so why would this relationship, your main thing relationship in life, deserve less attention or opportunity for expression? So I'm going to encourage you to enter into written words. And oddly, it was kind of a strange occurrence even today. Before meeting with you in this way, I ran into something that I had done last February about Valentine's Day. We're a ministry that believes very much that you and I living impactful lives has everything to do with our living with our hearts on fire and our lives on purpose. So last February we were kind of in this concentration during Love Month of what it meant to be a heart on fire. And we had all kinds of things spread out on a table that were elements that you could make a Valentine card. And then it was our opportunity to express ourselves, not through written, but artistic expression cards that would have words, but also would have visual opportunity for us to give God a love gift. It was powerful, not just to do it then, but with markers and stick-ons and all sorts of things that were available to look back at that and to be reminded of a treasured, cherished love moment time of my heart's expression to God and the relationship He has with me. Third thing, so spoken words, written words. Third thing is doing things or service. That's another love language. And I want to encourage you, when you are doing things that maybe prior to now have been about God, would you begin to do them for God? Do them to Him. Like when you're giving a gift at church, maybe putting it in the offering basket or the plate that comes around, would you think in your heart new thoughts? To you, God, this is to you. When you're doing things that are volunteer service, as you're driving that direction or walking that direction, would you make it your gift to Him and say, Lord, I'm doing this to you? You know, Jesus said there was going to come a day where people were going to wonder, when did we do this for you, Jesus? Like, when did we clothe you or feed you or come visit you? And He said, when you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. So why not in your mind just begin to think about service and things that you're doing and go, Lord, I'm doing this to and for you. This is about you. Unto you, Lord, unto you. Then the fourth language of love is giving gifts. I think there are times where you and I are just real cerebral about the way we give our gifts to God. Well, I need to give my tithe. Let's see. What's 10% of what I made? That's a tithe. But what about love gifts? What about in the name of Jesus? It's a love gift you're giving to Him as you're giving it to His body. And so it might be, I had somebody recently send me bags of coffee from their state. And I realized as I went to thank the person, they reached back over state lines and said, that actually was a gift to God. I just felt Him inspire that I was to send to you. So there are things that you might feel God inspiring you to give or to do that are about your love relationship with Him. There are scriptural stories about people who gave love gifts. One widow, it wasn't what you would consider to be a lot. It was a fraction of a cent. But Jesus knew as He watched that she had placed everything in there. And He put her in the record books, sort of like a little boy who gave his loaves and fishes to feed a group of people and partnered with Jesus in that. For somebody else, she took a fragrant alabaster jar, which the jar itself would have been expensive, beautiful hand-carved jar, and she didn't economize and drop an eyedropper's worth out. She broke the vase and poured it out on the feet of Jesus, and He had her put in the memory book of His word to say, she has done a beautiful thing. It was a love gift to Him, while others in the room were experiencing the fragrance, and they were getting in on it. Her gift was for Him. It was a love gift to Him. So giving gifts of love, think about, maybe even ask Him, Lord, what do I have that would just please you for me to give to you? I remember one day, just a piece of wood. I'd been out hiking and I was on a date with God. And I'm married to an art teacher. I grew up in kind of an artistic family, and I had a knife in my pocket, and I began carving around in this thing, and then I began to feel like God was saying, that would be a gift to me if you'd like to just continue to. And I began to make it into a gift. It didn't cost me anything except the love I had in my heart for Him, and recognizing that this was something that I wanted to offer to him as just an element from a date. Other times it's been something pretty extravagant where God said, I could sure use that. I go, are you kidding? That's expensive. That's a big deal gift. But I can tell you the day, I'm remembering one in particular, when it was moved out of my possession and into the possession of God's, where he was going to get to use it in the life of a congregational church community. It was a large gift for a guy like me. But I wished I'd had 1,000 that day, because on that day I just felt God smile, almost like he looked across a room like at Christmas and went, what? You gave this to me? I mean, I wished I'd had 1,000 to give. It's decades later, a cherished moment, giving a gift to him. And then finally, the fifth one is touch. You go, okay, that's a love language that's horizontal. Is it? I can remember when my nephew taught me a potent lesson, when he'd always, as a little guy, when I'd come his direction, I'd come over to his house and he'd be standing in the little window. I could see the curtain pushed back, and he'd see Uncle Dwight arrive, and he'd toddle out the sidewalk, and his arms would be out toward me, and I'd reach in and pull him up. And this morning I was reading James 4:8 that says, come near to God and he'll come near to you. When's the last time you did this with him? Because I remember one time sacrificially driving an hour and a half to get to a connect place with my nephew. But it so happened I missed getting to see him at his house, and he was already at the t-ball field where he was going to be playing athletic t-ball with his friends. And when I pulled up into the parking lot and I yelled across the field, hey, and yelled his name, he looked back at me and he looked at his friends, and like, it was this freak out moment, like, and his connectivity with them trumped a connection with me. And he casually waved, like he was almost waving me off at a distance, like, I've grown up on you, at least in this setting. And I sat there in my car, got back in my car in the parking lot, knowing he didn't know I'd sacrificed an hour and a half of my schedule to drive one way to get to see him. And I thought I felt God kind of nudge me on the shoulder going, hey, Dwight, I know that feeling. So Dwight, don't ever grow up on me. Do you remember, Dwight, when you read when Jesus said, if you want to enter the kingdom, anybody who wants to enter the kingdom must enter it like a child? Would you keep on raising your hands to me like a child? Because I'm your Abba, Daddy, Papa, Father. Would you be a child with me? Would you forget the other people? Would you let go of how you're going to be viewed by them, and would you just run to me? Would you pursue me? Would you care more about my opinion and my heart for you than you do about anyone else? Because that's a touch, come near to God and he'll come near to you, that God will respond to. When you and I, maybe it's you get on your knees before him, and the physicality of being on your knees, maybe it's you just lay on the floor before him, prostrate, on your face or on your back. Lord, I'm yours. I'm fully yours. Whatever the posture, would you know that the physical body that he gave you has all kinds of capability, as it does in life. You use your body for a million things. Would you offer, Scripture says, Romans 12, to present your body as a living sacrifice, which is only a reasonable worship. One guy, he will sit before God and offer the parts of his body. He'll offer his ears to God, and his eyes to God, his tongue to God. And he said, I just go down from head to toe, just offering my whole self to him. You and I want to choose to communicate our love. And finally, you and I, as we've thought about choosing God as our main thing, first love, then we've decided we want to communicate our love to God in all those love language ways. I'm going to take you to a sixth love language, for me at least, maybe for you, and take us in to choose to demonstrate your love. What does it mean to demonstrate your love? You know, one night when Jesus got up from a table, probably a little uncomfortable for people who were gathered around him, as he kind of pushed back, and he went over and got a basin and a towel, and he got down on his hands and knees and began to wash their feet. Muddy, crusty feet. Some of those feet had already been traveling back and forth to places where one of the sets of feet he washed, where he was already conspiring how he was going to betray Jesus. And Jesus would stoop down and lovingly wash his feet. And he said, I've set you an example. It was a love example. It was a love example that got up from the table and did something to show love. There are times, not only on the cross, washing feet, or touching a leper everyone else was frightened to touch, sitting with the risk of reputation with a Samaritan over non-bottled spring water, where it wasn't just a life conversation that she received, it was a hit to his reputation as a rabbi, as a male teacher, crossing over all kinds of what were considered to be inappropriate lines. It was a demonstration of love. Love for God who loved this woman, and so he was demonstrating his love for the Father and love for her in this moment. There are times and ways that you and I have to get past words, whether they're spoken or they're written, where suddenly it's all on the line. We are going to push out a comfort zone and we're going to demonstrate our love. I've asked people sometimes questions like, what is it that you would not do? Come on. What is it you would not do? You've thought in your mind, I wouldn't do, I'd do almost, did you hear that? Almost anything but. What is it you would not do? Who is it you would not leave? Where is it you would not go? Or what is it you would not give? If you have answers for any of those things, then you got things between you and your first love. Until you can say anything, anywhere, there isn't anything I wouldn't do, or place I wouldn't go, or gift I wouldn't give. You've not graduated into what would, by one guy I met in the city of Boston who described it as university love. You wouldn't have graduated into his description of university love. We had finished a city camp. We were training people from across North America, the United States and Canada. And we'd been in Boston for 10 days, what we called city camp. We'd been in Boston Commons and Harvard Square and on the streets of the city. And we got to the last night and realized we had no picture of all of us together. Everybody raced back to their hotel rooms and got their cameras, and a pile of cameras formed. Nobody wanted anyone left out of the photo, so we recruited a security guard from the lobby to take the picture. And when he came over and started taking one after another and then taking the pile of cameras and turning them into a finished pile to his left, and how does this one work? And he'd get the description and he'd snap. Finally, all the cameras were in a finished pile, and I went over and said, hello, I'm Dwight. I'm one of the leaders of this group. I'm so sorry. We've really taken your time. That was an imposition, and thank you very much. What's your name? I said. And he said, Mahmoud. I said, I'm sorry, what was your name? He said, Mahmoud. And I said, Mahmoud, what are you doing here in Boston? He said, I am a student. This is my night job. And he said, what do you do here? I said, well, I'm leading a group of people that are learning how to love God and love other people better. I mean, that's our hope. That's our heart's cry. We want to love God more and love other people. He said, do you want to know what I believe? I said, sure, yeah. I felt like we owed him something for all the cameras that he'd fiddled around with taking all these pictures, and he ushered me over to his security guard desk in the corner of the lobby, and he pulled out a piece of paper and he began to draw a box. He said, this is Moses, and the Jewish way is very good. I call this grade school. He looked at me and drew another box, and he said, this is Jesus Christ, and the Christian way is very, very good. How many years ago Jesus Christ poured out his blood? I said, 2,000 years. He said, you see, he sacrificed to get the message. 2,000 years later, he get message to you. I call this high school. High school. Then he didn't look back at me for a moment. He just looked at his paper and drew this big box, and he said, this is university. This is Muhammad and the Muslim way. I call this university. And then he looked straight at me. He said, you want to know why I call this university? I said, sure. I'd like to know why. He said, I have Christians in high school because Christians, they sacrifice nothing. They go to church once, twice a week. They put little money in the plate, but they sacrifice nothing. But a Muslim gladly die for Muhammad. I wanted to take Mahmoud and introduce him to Laura, who every day we would wait. She would be late, 45 minutes late, an hour and 15 minutes late, because she'd be out there in the streets or in a park and say, I was saved out of the bar scene. And I just kept thinking, what if that person's me? What if that person's me? I wanted to take him to the little Chinese lady who I'd met the day before, who stopped me in the park and said, you Christian? And she went on to tell me about how she and her family had gone through hardship in China, and her father was put in prison, her sister in a mental hospital with nothing wrong in her brain. She said, but last year, I go back to China and I place Bibles in suitcases. I try to make suitcases look very light, but they're very heavy. She said, I get through customs, all Bibles through customs. She said, and then I just kept listening to this little Chinese lady, this little lady. She said, and then I take these Bibles and I say, here, you read this, it changed your life. Here, you read this, it changed your life. I give all Bibles away, it's a very good thing. See, yes, very good thing. I said, yes, that's a brave, incredible, sacrificial thing. I wanted him to meet people who graduated out of high school love for God into university love, who would say to God, there is, kind of what Jim Elliot, the missionary who was martyred, said, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And when you enter that kind of love, come on, you become dangerous. Your life takes on a whole different hyper speed and depth. There's an old hymn that says, oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus. You and I focus and concentrate that he loved us sacrificially. He set forth an example for us. And he calls us to follow him. So when I think about what Jesus did for me, is this, love match on both ends of the rope? Am I just full of a heart of gratitude? Or is my heart moving somehow into graduation from high school love to university love? And I could say to him, Lord, help me, because I want to go the distance. You're saying and thinking, Dwight, you were going to introduce us to that sixth language of love? Yeah. Jesus said, my meat is to do the will of him who sent me. Come on, you and I, we love food, don't we? I do, I love food. It's a love language for me. My wife laughs that she found my heart through my stomach. She fed me my first meal, and I went out to my car that night and I went, I love this woman, I could marry this woman, this is amazing. And she laughs because even last night she served me a meal. I must have told her 10 times, honey, this is so good. Food is definitely a love language. I love it a lot. And Jesus, when he said, my meat is to do the will of him who sent me, and he likened himself to being the bread of life, and there were all kinds of food analogies, and I see him at meal tables with people a lot, and I think about how it became sometimes a leverage tool to get people out into, like for Matthew, the first place he shows up is at a meal table after they're sharing food. He kind of invites Matthew into a whole lifestyle of making Jesus his bread of life. But Peter was having a tough time finding the life he was meant to live. So as we close out this section, in John 21, Peter actually had a guy ask me just a few days ago about this passage. Peter is out fishing for fish again. It looks like, this is going to be the end of this guy who Jesus told, your life's going to make such an impact. You're going to be a rock on which I'm going to build my church. You're going to, just follow me and I'm going to show you how to be a fisher of men. And now he's out fishing for fish in somebody's boat in John 21. And Jesus uses this love language of food to reel him in. He calls out to the boat and Peter's kind of focused on fish. And Jesus is yelling from the shore, hey, you caught anything yet? And these guys they've been out there all night. They've caught nothing. So they yell back, no, we've got nothing. And he tells them to throw the net down on the other side. And I think in the process of this miraculous catch, minds begin to race back to earlier scenes with Jesus. And John, the beloved, said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And in that moment, Peter's heart was so full of longing after and having missed the Lord that he jumps out of the boat and begins to swim to shore. And what Jesus has got prepared for Peter is a breakfast. I mean, come on, Peter's a guy. And whether you're a guy or a gal, sometimes food just sort of warms and softens us up for intimate conversational times. And Jesus knew that. So this love language of food, Jesus has got breakfast fixed for these tired fishermen who've been out fishing all night in that cold boat, pulling up empty all night, and then now their muscles have been straining to try to make sure they get all these fish. And one of the fishermen telling the story wants you to know there were 153 large fish. They get them all back to shore, but Peter's wet now from having swum to shore. He's pulled up toward a warm fire, maybe perhaps remembering when he had betrayed the Lord near a fire just earlier, just weeks ago, denying that he knew who Jesus was or that he was a follower. And Jesus pulls over next to him and says, "Hey, Peter, do you love me?" "Yeah, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus gives him something to do. Not speak, not write, but to do, to demonstrate his love. And he said, "Then feed my lambs." Jesus asked him again, "Do you love me?" That was kind of weird. I mean, they just had this conversation, didn't they? "Do you love me? Do you love me more than these?" And Jesus asked the question, so Peter, "Yeah, Lord, I love you. You know I love you. And take care of my sheep." "Okay, yeah. Got it." Like, those are doing type things. And Peter's kind of a doer. He was always the guy, "Hey, Lord, if that's you, I'll come out to you on the water." I mean, he was the guy whipping off somebody's ear. He's the man of action, but now Jesus knows that he's kind of lost his momentum. His courage has waned, and he's a bit self-defeated because he denied the Lord, and he sort of lost track of the whole mission his life was supposed to be about. But Jesus knew that love would take him the distance and beyond. So a third time he asked him, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter answered, "Lord, you know all things. You know I love you." "Well, then feed my sheep." And then he said, "I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go." And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, same words he'd said the first day they met, "Follow me." I think he was saying, follow me, follow my example. Know that I did a hard thing. I demonstrated my love, and you can too, Peter. I'll get you there. But let's start, Peter, by feed my lambs. Let's start, Peter, by take care of my sheep. Peter, let's start with knowing that when love gets going in you and it drives your life, you've chosen me as your first love, and you're communicating that love. And then there are moments that I'll give you to demonstrate that love. It will take you the distance and beyond. It'll bypass logic and reason. So when you look at your outline, until I can say whatever, wherever, whenever, however, I haven't graduated from university love for God. The people who have done great things for God are those who have loved God greatly, choosing to demonstrate their love, knowing that the greatest gift you and I will ever give this world is our intimacy with God, that with him I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. See, the greatest in the kingdom are those who loved God more than others did. It's not complicated. It's not really even informationally driven or perfected life driven. Peter wasn't a perfect life, and Jesus didn't give him an examination quiz to say, how much do you know? How much you got packed up there in your noggin, Peter? There wasn't a finals test he was given. There wasn't a document for him to turn in. The questions at the end were, do you love me? I got something for you to do. Do you love me? Do you love me? So you've chosen. You're communicating. Will you demonstrate? And will you know that the main thing in life is to remember to keep the main thing. Love God with all of your everything.